Today we're going to look at the life of another great artist, Michelangelo. He lived at the same time as Da Vinci, the Renaissance. Like Da Vinci, he was talented in many different areas: painting, sculpture and architecture. He was born in 1475 in Italy. We actually know quite a lot about his life. The amount of work he produced and the amount of letters he wrote have given us a good understanding of his life. Much more than most people who lived at his time, at least. When he was not much more than a baby, his mother became ill, so the young Michelangelo was cared for by a different family. This family's work was sculpture. From his earliest days, he lived in the workshop. He grew up in an environment where art was being created. He went to school a few years later, but he wasn't really focused on his school. He was much more interested in the paintings in churches nearby. His father wanted the boy to become a good businessman or a lawyer, and didn't like that his only interest was art. But eventually Michelangelo went to work as an apprentice in the workshop of a painter in Florence. When he was in Florence, he started studying sculpture in the gardens of the palace of the famous Medici family. This family were very rich and powerful, and Michelangelo was able to meet all the people they knew and build up lots of good contacts. In 1495 he started working in sculpture. The style he used was the classical style, the style of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. The Renaissance was a time when the classical world was being rediscovered, and people were interested in classical art and philosophy. Michelangelo first created his sculptures in this classical style, and then different methods were used to age the sculpture, to try and make it look old. There's a story that someone in the church bought one of Michelangelo's sculptures, thinking it was a real antique, a real piece of old classical sculpture. When he discovered it was actually a new piece, he wasn't angry. He was actually very impressed by Michelangelo's skill. The man invited Michelangelo to come to Rome, to live and work there. He did this, and would stay there for the rest of his life. He was only 25 at the time, but he then created one of his most famous works. It was the sculpture of Mary holding the dying Jesus, and it was made out of one huge block of marble. Today it's in the main church in the Vatican in Rome. After this, he created another very well-known work, a statue of David made of marble. Two people had tried to do this statue before, but it was Michelangelo who finally completed it. After these famous sculptures, he moved on to painting. He preferred sculpture and didn't really like painting very much. He thought that sculpture was the higher art, but even so, he was a master painter too. The greatest of his paintings is surely the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. It took him many years to complete, partly because he fired all his assistants and helpers. He thought they weren't doing it well enough, so to make sure it was done properly, he had to do it all himself. The most famous part of this work is the central piece, where God and man are touching fingers. It wasn't just sculpture and painting that he was a master of, however. He was also a great architect. In 1546, he created the building of St. Peter's as we see it today, at the Vatican in Rome. This was his greatest architectural achievement, especially the dome at the top of the church. Like Da Vinci, Michelangelo was a true Renaissance man, someone who was master of many things. He devoted his life to art and the many different varieties of it. He said, "However rich I may have been, I have always lived like a poor man." He didn't care about food and drink, and he ate more out of necessity than of pleasure. He was known for having a bad temper and for being very emotional. He was often involved in conflicts with people over politics and religion. However, Unlike many other great artists, he was famous and respected in his own lifetime. He was actually the first artist in Europe to have a biography written about his life while he was still alive.